But first, we'll talk about JJ Redick, who's getting some Coach of the Year love from ESPN. I think that has a little bit more to do with, I'm using air quotes here, the brotherhood, because it was Jay Williams that said it. But you know what? This is kind of what you and I talked about when JJ Redick got this coaching job with the Lakers. He talked about how meticulous he was and his game day routines and the preparation and how he was so specific. And I figured he would have that exact same approach to coaching. And we saw it in that Nuggets game. So we can start there. And you and I kind of talked about this last show where we saw this Luka Doncic, LeBron James pairing going, or what they had to work through for it to work. Man, it's looking pretty good after that Nuggets game and that Mavericks game where Luka had a triple-double against his former team.
Yeah, well, first off, I want to go back to the JJ Redick stuff, because did you see that video of his post-game speech after the Nuggets win?
I was ready to go suit up.
No, same here. I was like, it was giving me like goosebumps, and I'm like, I'm not a Lakers fan by any means. No, I am a JJ Redick fan for sure. If you listen to us, if you listen to the pod after JJ got hired, everything, these are two, Gil and I both have been very much on the side of belief that JJ Redick could be a great NBA head coach. But that was one where I'm like, I'm ready to run through a wall for this guy. And, I like these guys, there's got to be so much belief in Redick, in his knowledge of the game, in his game plans, for them to buy in the way that they did. The Nuggets had won 15 of the last 16 matchups against the Lakers including playoffs. And all of a sudden they just blew the doors off of them in a game that Luka, he'd only been playing a full workload for like 2 games at that point. And they executed a game plan. They don't have a big man, and they still found a way to contain Nikola Jokic, who only took like 5 shots through the first 3.5 quarters of the game. So they executed at a high level and found a way to win. And, I gave Luka a little bit of crap last week on how he very much has to have a team that fits around him in order for him to be successful. And I still feel that way. But I do think that a little bit of what I wasn't taking into consideration was the human aspect of things. And he's been a lot more open and honest about that over the last couple of games, of just like how he was still processing all of this over the first couple of games. And he didn't really have that fire. And then you see that JJ Redick quote where he just wants him to have a blackout episode where he just is screaming at nobody. And that's when he's at his best. And that really is the truth. I think back to, that pivotal game 6 against the Wolves last year that knocked the Wolves out of the playoffs. And Luka in the first quarter just goes absolutely nuclear. And he's just like a fire-breathing dragon screaming at half court after hitting step back after step back after step back. And we started to see that in that Mavs game. In that Nuggets game, and then again in the Mavs game. So we're starting to see him get that swagger back a little bit. And I'm really impressed with the way that him and LeBron have worked off of each other. I'm really impressed with the way Austin Reeves has been able to kind of settle into his role and still find a way to, make contributions. Defensively, they have the number 1 defense in the NBA since the All-Star break. So clearly they're buying into what JJ Redick's doing on that end. The Lakers are rolling. How far can they really take it? A lot of that might depend on who they get matched up with in the first round. But I think that I can confidently say that there's no team in the Western Conference at this moment right now that is hoping that they see the Lakers in the first round.
Yeah, well, I'll start with that Nuggets game. 2 points. I forgot who it was, so apologies. But somebody on Twitter posted just the strategy that they had for getting the ball out of Jokic's hands. And we've talked about how thin the Lakers are in the front court. And basically at every turn, he saw a body, whether it was Jackson Hayes, whether it was Rui checking him, whether it was Austin Reeves. Those guys are making them feel him, and it just disrupted everything that they did on offense. Is that sustainable for a 7-game series? I don't know. But again, that's that game plan that JJ Redick said he was up at 5 in the morning, just thinking about crafting.
Didn't sleep.
And it didn't sleep and making it come true. And then you mentioned, I remember I tweeted this exact thing. I said, Luka is sick, LOL. It was like a transition 3 that he just pulled up and hit. And he just starts just like kind of yelling and talking to himself. And I was like, that's the Luka, that's the Luka that we know and we hadn't really seen yet. And I think part of it, right, is like you said, the human side of it and the comfort side, right? You're in a new group of guys who you maybe know a little bit. And I know that he played with Dorian Finney-Smith and Marcus Morris and Maxi Kleber came with him. But for the most part, these guys don't know you, right? So it's kind of like any time you're hooping with a new group, you're maybe a little more tentative to just kind of let loose and be yourself. And I say that to say, thinking about that Mavericks game, and there was, the semi-pro connection or whatever when he and LeBron were giving it back and forth to each other. But that's what I said when we talked about that trade, though, right? Where it was like, okay, late game situation. You want the ball out of one of their hands. It only means it's in the other one's hands. So at that play, they're like, okay, do we send a double at LeBron? Do we send a double at Luka? And eventually they sent it at Luka. He kicked it out to LeBron, catch and shoot three. And I think that the thing that we didn't do or we didn't consider, didn't really think about is LeBron is a much improved catch and shoot three-point shooter. And that's just been a reality of this later stage, this chapter of his career. And also he's an awesome cutter. And we've talked so much about, Luka being the quarterback and LeBron being the wide receiver, or he talked about it anyway. And we're starting to see that pairing. So spinning that forward to what you were saying, taking a snapshot of the standings as we record right now, OKC at the top of the standings on their own, all by themselves. Then there's that logjam between 2 and 5. It's Memphis, Denver, Houston, and LA, Lakers. And then there's another one, the Clippers, Timberwolves, Warriors, Mavs, Kings. And it's kind of set right now. And the Suns and Trailblazers are ironically right there with each other. It says more about the Suns on the outside looking in. I kind of feel like these are the 10 teams we're going to get in the Western Conference postseason. But taking a snapshot of that, who do you think are advantageous matchups for the Lakers? I guess who do they want to see, or who they might not they want to see in the postseason?
I would actually disagree with what Shaq said the other night, where he's like, they want no part of Houston, just like a young team that's running around like crazy and all that. And I'm like, that's what I'm saying. Like the lights would be a little bit too bright for Houston, in my opinion, in that series, especially like you said, trying to scheme a defensive game plan to stop both LeBron and Luka is no easy task. And they have incredible defenders. They've been one of the best defenses in the league all year, but it's like, that's a pretty tough first playoff series for a lot of those young guys to try and find a way to stop those two guys. I actually think that's a matchup where the Lakers would be licking their chops. And in the Rockets, Fred VanVleet's been out. He's a massive reason for their success, even if the stats don't necessarily show it. But they're kind of sliding a little bit right now, and I think that's a matchup that the Lakers would welcome. Now, a matchup that they don't want, it speaks for itself. Denver is a matchup that I don't think, even though they just kind of beat the doors off them the other night, they're not asking for Nikola Jokic in the first round. Nobody's asking for Nikola Jokic in the first round. Jamal Murray always gets up for those games. You know what I mean? But then there's some other teams in that mix that it's like it could turn into a really competitive playoff series. Golden State with Steph and Jimmy Butler and Draymond Green. I think we both owe them an apology a little bit. Yeah. Again, I think I was thinking about it a little bit too much directly on the court. Like, how does Jimmy Butler impact that team? And less about the actual just swagger aspect of it, and just giving them a little bit more confidence, having a star like that in the locker room, having an attitude like that in the locker room. They're really starting to click on defense, and he's opened up a lot of things for Steph on offense. They're starting to hit their stride a little bit. I think that would be an awesome first round playoff series. Minnesota is another team. Ant kind of carries himself with that level of swagger, and they got a lot of guys that are long, can defend, and they really disrupt Luka and LeBron. I'd really love to see that in the first round of the playoffs. So I think for the Lakers, they'd be okay with teams like Memphis and Houston, and it gets a little bit more dicey with teams like Denver, Minnesota, Golden State. But this is kind of what we're think about these teams that we're bringing up right now. If you were to if you were to just pull these names out of a hat and put any of these teams against each other in the first round of the playoffs, that's must-see TV. Must see TV. Absolutely. I think, you mentioned Minnesota, and we saw what Luka did to them last year. I think the interesting thing that we've kind of learned about him is the type of defenders that give him a tougher time. Jaylen Brown in the finals, Drew Holiday in the finals, Lou Dort, right? The stockier guys are the guys who give him difficult times, where a Jaden McDaniels, he might have his way a little more because he can use that brute force and brute strength. Now, where the kicker is now, it's Luka and LeBron. So who do you put your best perimeter defender on during these games? And now that with the JJ Redick again is kind of shifting these guys and having them alternate time on the floor until it's closing time, you kind of can tire out another team's best perimeter defender. And obviously you have to talk about it. If it's a Rockets, you get a Dillon Brooks matchup with those guys. So of course, another chapter of that. Last thing that I'm going to say before we go to the break, to your point about the Warriors, I think the biggest thing that, again, I owe an apology to, we were so caught up in what Jimmy wasn't doing in Miami, and also the type of player that he was in Miami. He's not playing the game the same way that he played with the Heat. And it's things that he's always been capable of, but I guess things that we didn't know that he was going to do with this team, being a hub from the post, rebounding, distributing the ball well. And the biggest thing that I saw somebody tweet today about him and Draymond Green, they talked about their attitudes. Well, the reality is the only people they have issues with are people that don't think like him. And they are cut from the same cloth and wired pretty similarly.
I just thought that going into it, Jimmy didn't want to be there, and he was going to kind of act similarly because he only wanted to be in Phoenix, when in reality, he just wanted to be out of Miami. And now that he's out of Miami, he's back playing basketball. He said he found his joy again. And the last point, I think that ultimately the toughest matchups for the Lakers, first round or however far they get in the playoffs, is if whatever team has a star as big as theirs. So you mentioned it. Steph Curry, Nikola Jokic at the top of the list. Anthony Edwards is getting to that list or getting to that level. So we'll see how that goes.